All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's MakerDAO community call. It's June 25th, and this is the weekly call that we do. We've been doing for almost, I think, a year and a half or even 2 years. And this call, we typically go through some of the stuff that's going on in the MakerDAO universe over the last week. And every now and then, we get special guests and cool things happening. And this week, there is a really cool thing happening because I don't know about you guys, but when I got into Ethereum like a couple of years ago, there were all of these kind of like fantastic ideas and like nothing really to show for it, and everybody's building and building. And like now we're starting to see more and more of these kind of products come to launch. And one of these, kind of really cool ideas is the idea of a no loss lottery. And so today we have the guys from PoolTogether, both Zachary Larson, both Leighton and Brendan from PoolTogether are here. Originally, it was only Leighton going to be on the call, but Brendan's joining us as well. So they're going to do a brief demo. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we're going to have some Q&A about the project. And then after that, we're going to go into our usual agenda, which I'll post in the chat for you guys so you can follow along. But yeah. So Leighton, you want to introduce yourself first?
Cool. Yeah. So my name is Leighton Cusack. I'm the founder of PoolTogether and sort of manage just the overall direction, kind of like high level of product direction. It's a 4-person team. So I'll introduce the 2 people. I'll let Brendan introduce himself. But the 2 people who aren't here, there's a designer who did all the design, obviously, of the PoolTogether website. There's Brendan, colleagues, Chuck, who did all the front end development, and then there's Brendan. So then I'm doing kind of like all the non-engineering stuff related to PoolTogether. But Brendan, I'll let you introduce yourself too.
Yeah, thanks, Leighton. Hi, guys. I am Brendan Asselstein. I am the fellow behind the smart contracts for PoolTogether. Chuck and I run our consultancy, Delta Camp, and we met Leighton at ETH Denver, and he had this fantastic idea for a lossless lottery. Immediately captured our attention. So yeah, we were super excited to work with him to build this thing out, and we're very excited to launch it. So yeah, let's give him a great demo.
So Leighton, how did you actually come up with the idea? Like, what sparked your interest to do it?
Yeah, so I was researching basically financial tools to help with economic mobility. So economic mobility is like a big theme for me, trying to work on how do we get people to move in between income brackets, because I think that's super important for economic health. And so I came across the idea of no loss lotteries, aka prize linked savings accounts. And it's like a well-known idea. It's a really good idea. It's been proven to divert money from lottery games to savings, but it had never been done on blockchain. And I already had kind of a pretty deep understanding of blockchain, and so particularly Ethereum. And so with that understanding, I could just kind of said like, oh, this is a really smart concept, and it's actually one of those few concepts that actually works way better on blockchain than like in normal fiat currency. And so that's kind of how I got to it.
Nice. And so from like to today's, like, when did you guys actually like start the project? You guys said the idea was in ETH Denver?
So yeah, so the idea was in ETH Denver. I worked on it with a different team at ETH Denver. We were not selected as one of the top contenders. So if anyone's had that experience, carry on, keep trying. But I met Brendan and Chuck, and they run together. They make up Delta Camp. I met them at ETH Denver at the very end, at the happy hour, and we decided to start working on it together. And so we built the first prototype, and it was pretty rough. It was only on Rinkeby, no intention to go to mainnet, or actually with an intention to go to mainnet, but only on Rinkeby. And posted that on MakerDAO, on MakerDAO Reddit. And we got a bunch of really good feedback. So if any of you guys are on this call who like upvoted or whatever, that was super important to us. And if that hadn't happened, we hadn't gotten that positive feedback, we would not have brought it to mainnet. So we got a bunch of really good feedback. Through that, got connected to Rich, applied for a grant to get it to mainnet, and got the grant from Maker to get it to mainnet. And that's where we're at today. So basically, ETH Denver was February 14th. So we've been working on it since then, but it hasn't been a full-time project that whole time.
Nice. So something between like 4 and 5 months. Nice. That's really cool. Nice. So you guys have a 4-person team. So yeah. So Brendan, you want to wait? Sorry, you already introduced yourself, right? My bad.
Yeah.
It's Tuesday. Yeah. So cool. So let's get into the demo.
Awesome. So do you want me to just like walk through the product?
Yeah, sure. If you want, you could share your screen and we could do that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So wait, let me see. Present. Okay, here we go. And I'll just do. I assume it might be some quick review, and then just like I don't know. Should we go open it up to questions, David, or do you have a couple of specific questions before we open it up?
Let's do the demo, and then throughout, if people have any particular questions, anybody on the call right now, feel free to interrupt and just kind of even type out your questions in the chat. But yeah, let's kind of look through the product first, and then afterwards we can get through some of the questions. I got some of the questions from Twitter today, and yeah, it's gonna be a good run. But let's kind of check out the product first.
Okay, I'm having trouble sharing my screen right now. Wait, okay, I think I'm good. All right, are you guys seeing PoolTogether?
Yes, it is. It's pulling up right now. Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so yeah, so I don't want to walk through the whole process of joining because I'm intentionally not joining this pool just because I'm really scared I might win, and that would just look too weird. So I actually don't want to join this pool right now, but we can obviously walk through the site. So the design of the site, it's set up so that it actually oh, there's join pool. It's lands on this page with how it works already kind of extended. So we went with no landing page. You kind of like just go right into the app. Here you have the estimated prize. And this will fluctuate live based on the live interest rate from Compound Finance. So that's coming in live. Below you have the number of tickets here that have been sold, and then if you have purchased any, you'll see it right below there. Here you can look at
quick question.
Yeah.
So that estimated prize, is that based on if like the pool was settled at this second, this is how much interest accrued, or is this like, if the pool settles in 15 days at the current interest rate, this is how much the prize is?
It's 15 days at the current interest rate with the current amount of capital contributed.
Got it.
Yeah. So the actual prize will likely not be that exact number, but that's what it currently is estimated. So here we have pools. You can see past pools. So we did obviously a bunch of tests on Rinkeby, but we did one really small test on mainnet just before. So that's why this prize is super small, 0.2 Dai. Yeah, so that's past pools. We have some content pages here, just FAQ and how it works, and then join the pool, where you can actually select how many tickets you want. This live updates with what your current odds are based on how many tickets you purchased. So you can purchase, if I want 1,000 tickets, I have a 35% chance of winning, and the total number of Dai here. And then it's 2-step enable Dai, and then you can purchase Dai.
Nice.
So yeah. That's the overall flow. It's a pretty simple app.
Very cool. So there is a question in the chat from Chris Blechschmidt. Can you talk a bit about why you think this idea works better via closed source code on an open blockchain rather than in like a centralized format? It seems that the closed source nature of the project negates most of the benefits that open blockchain may bring.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I'll just switch back to my video here for a second to answer that. Okay, so I kind of see two questions there, like closed versus open, and then also like on blockchain versus not. So on the closed versus open thing, because I obviously wanted to address that, and I said that. So just to step back, give you guys a little background. I'm obviously not an engineer. I'm the leader of this project. I do consider myself to be pretty technical, but I've never worked on a open source project before, and I've also never worked on a blockchain project before this. So to be honest, I didn't really understand the full implications of open versus closed source. When I first said I wanted to close source the code, I was just kind of thinking from a business perspective, like this probably happens all the time. It's no big deal. Like it doesn't really make sense to open source it because then people are just going to copy it. I did not understand the full implications of that, particularly as it relates to its particularly as it relates to the ability of people to trust PoolTogether. I kind of thought the audit would cover that. So anyways, obviously got a lot of feedback on that yesterday. And even this morning when I logged onto Twitter, there was quite a bit of stuff. And so with like a fuller understanding, we're going to open source the code, and we'll do that today, and it will probably be done. I mean, I don't even know. Brendan can speak to that, but it'll be done soon. So that's on the open versus closed. To get on the blockchain versus non-blockchain, I see the three big advantages of being on blockchain as oh, it's done. All right. So you guys heard it here first on the
Awesome stuff.
Maker community call. PoolTogether is open sourced.
Nice. Love it.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, and again, like, there was no malicious intent there. It's just, quite honestly, although I wouldn't say I'm new to crypto, I am new to leading a crypto project, and I had some stuff I had to learn about what the implications of that was. So
yeah. And Brendan mentions it's MIT licensed, so it's free for everyone to use, and they're still working on the Etherscan verification of the contract.
Yeah. But I did want to just touch on the blockchain versus non-blockchain, because I think that's kind of cool. So the three things I think that make this better on blockchain versus centralized is, I think the biggest is just like the low overhead to run it. So like if I'm going to run one of these, and the problem is the interest prize is so small that like if you have any overhead, it obliterates like the interest prize. So low overhead to run the whole thing. I think the second thing is the global nature of it. Like you're not limited to one jurisdiction. You're not limited to just like Portugal or United States or Canada or whatever. And then I think the third is obviously what we just touched on with open sourcing, is like the verifiability of like odds, and that people are being paid proportionally and all that kind of stuff. So.
Very cool, very cool. So actually this relates to one of the questions I had. So a lot of people were asking about how the randomness is actually generated, because that's like a really common problem in like computer science, how to actually get genuine randomness. And so
yes,
yeah,
that goes to the genius Brendan, who's on our call, and I'm going to have him speak to that.
Wow, that's quite the introduction. I don't really consider myself a genius, but especially as we've had some interesting feedback regarding the random selection. So I don't know how many of you follow on Twitter, say Nick Johnson, but he actually did respond to, or sorry, no, it was another fellow that responded. Anyway, how it works is we wanted to basically combine a commit reveal process, but we didn't want to sort of burden the user with the need to reveal a secret. So we've centralized that somewhat in that the administrator of the contract actually commits a secret and then reveals it when the lottery is unlocked. And as part of that reveal, the owner, the administrator of the contract, gets their fee. So they're incentivized to reveal, to open up the contract for everyone. And then we also combine that with the block hash of the lock end block. So the block hash is one kind of potential exploit in this, in that a miner could work very hard to basically figure out a block hash that favors them, but that's if they know the secret as well. So there's some possibilities here of having some whistleblower logic around someone else submitting the secret rather than the owner, so they could capture the fees to sort of incentivize someone to sort of usurp them. But we think right now the pool's small enough that it's not a huge issue. And of course, Leighton's the administrator, and he's in a van, and so he doesn't really have access to a miner necessarily. But yeah, so that's sort of the first iteration. We're still working on it. We know randomness is very hard. There's some interesting oracles out there that we could potentially use. I know that Richard Moore had a really interesting technique at ETH New York that I still want to talk to him about, in terms of creating this kind of ephemeral account. So there's a few things that we can do to further mitigate any kind of prediction of this randomness or manipulation of it. But for now, that's how it works. So
nice.
Yeah,
so
if
Chris
question.
had a question. He wrote that seems like something that QuantStamp should have noticed. But I think my understanding is that QuantStamp is really just looking for pure, like, bugs in the code itself, not really like game theoretical bugs. Or like I don't know where that kind of falls. Did they notice?
They did. No,
Yeah.
just to answer that, they did address that. They said that there's a certain degree of decentralization. Centralization that was occurring, which is true because it's up to the admin to reveal that secret in order to unlock the funds. So what we did is we added a short circuit such that anyone after the lock-in period can unlock the smart contract. There is a call in there. So let's say Leighton forgets the secret or something like that, or it gets deleted from his computer so he can't reveal it. Anyone can call that function to unlock the funds so that people can withdraw the money that they put into it. So we do have that safety feature that we introduced after QuantStamp's feedback. So they were checking for that, as well as bugs, as well as code conventions. They were quite thorough with what they did. But we mitigated that problem as best we could. I mean, we're doing things very iteratively. We're not being very academic about this. I mean, we are to an extent to make sure that the code is correct and that there are enough protections for the user. But it's a difficult problem to address.
Yeah, I hear you guys. So in that spirit of like iteration, I know this is like kind of like the MVP. This is like the first launch on mainnet. So what are your plans for the next 3 months, then 6 months, and then like 1 to 5 years? Like, what do you see this growing into?
Yeah, I can take that. So first, to start broad strokes, we think of our feature roadmap in two kind of big categories. The first is broadening scope. So meaning broadening access really is what it is. So meaning making it way easier for normal people to get involved. And so that could obviously look like a lot of different features, but basically like how do you get Dai, how do you like manage it, like all that type of stuff. So we have a lot of features around that. That's one of our top priorities. The second priority is broadening platform functionality. And so to talk about what I mean by that, we see like the real of this story is not so much the no loss lottery, but it's like what is enabling the no loss lottery. So it's this idea of multi-party, short-term, no loss interest-bearing pools. And right now we're applying that to the concept of a no loss lottery, but you could apply that same financial instrument to a lot of different concepts. And so we want to start doing that. So I'll get concrete now and talk about features. So like I'm broadening the one feature that I think we'll do probably one of the, oh, sorry. Am I okay now?
Yeah, you're good now.
Okay. So on the broadening functionality, one thing that we'll do will be kind of first on the list is creating different distributions for reward types. So basically maybe everyone in the pool gets 2% interest, but then one person gets the delta between that 2% and what the interest earned is. So like 5%.
Oh, so it's like a all winner lottery.
It'd be like a
Also,
continuous actually earning your 2%.
Yeah.
Can I jump in and ask a real quick question there, Leighton? Because this raises some really interesting questions about social good and sort of the philosophies behind no loss lotteries. There's another name for it, which I'm sure that you can fill me in. It's something introductory savings law.
Prize link savings. Prize link savings.
Yeah, they're prize link savings. So you've referenced some articles and some research in your previous communications about how this is sort of like a gateway drug into this world of savings. Like, hey, look, interest is actually a thing, and if you spend $20 on a scratch card, maybe you can collect $60 and stick it into a savings account. So, how do you envision this project kind of developing that kind of activity or user behaviors, or do you think that's something that's just going to rise organically after people begin to use the tool and going, oh, hey, look at this, secondary lending platforms and crypto is a thing that we can explore?
Sorry, could you say just the last part? You said how something, and then start talking about user behavior. I missed that part.
Sure. So are you guys going to, like, I guess this is kind of a loaded question, but do you feel like PoolTogether is kind of educating a demographic about how to get engaged with savings or third-party lending platforms in the crypto ecosystem? Or do you think that this is just something that's some kind of subtext that people will begin to pick up, like, hey, I bought these tickets, but look at, now that I know that these prizes are available, I've understood the magic of compound interest. And so savings are actually a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously our hope to be the former, that people would, and I think we've already seen it on a tiny degree. So one thing that's been really probably the thing that's been most exciting to us about launching this is our friends and family who have joined this who don't use crypto. And that I don't think that's just because we're the people who built it. I also think that's because there's something compelling about it. And if you hop into like our Telegram chat, or if you look at my email inbox, there's a lot of people who have no idea.
Yeah,
Our hope is that then they can start understanding, wow, my money's actually.
Yeah, you cut out a bit there.
Sorry.
But I think you're onto something though.
Okay.
Like this is sort of like this gateway. This is introduction for a bunch of different interesting demographics who are not particularly crypto anarchists at heart. They just want to use something really cool, right? And this is the way to do it.
Yes, exactly. And that's the goal, right? Like, we don't want people to see us as a crypto product. We want them to see it as like a product to help their financial health, and it happens to utilize crypto.
Interesting. All right, thanks for that. That's really cool.
Right on. So broadening platform functionality. So different distribution types where like even if it's like it's not even a no loss lottery. It's a everybody wins lottery, but one person wins even more.
Exactly.
I like that a lot. Yeah.
Exactly.
What other kinds of functionality are you guys thinking of? I think you cut out again.
Do we lose?
Yeah.
Okay.
There you are.
I think I'm back. Brendan can talk about this too if I get cut out. But I think one of the other big things that we're excited about.
He's having.
This is a weird way to say it, but lotteries with predetermined winners.
Yeah.
Here, Brendan.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in just because we discussed the roadmap recently, and I think I seem to have a better connection than Leighton. So some of the features we talked about, I think Leighton touched on them in terms of onboarding. We're really excited about that. We've actually had a few people reach out to us regarding that aren't involved in the crypto space, just be like, hey, I'd like to get tickets to this. Kind of in jest because they're our friends, but at the same time, what we love is that this idea is tractable enough for people to understand as an entry point into the internet of money and this kind of autonomous escrow. So that's really exciting to us.
We've also jump in there. Actually, I'm gonna wreck your flow for a second here. So, like, how do you do that? That's like the $1 million question, right? So, crypto famously is crap when it comes to onboarding. So, how are you guys going to smooth out those rough edges?
Well, that's a really good question. We've been approached by Fortmatic, and I used Fortmatic at the last hackathon, and I really liked its interface. I think it's super slick. It's easy enough to use that most people can easily pick it up. And then we have options like, actually now we have Coinbase as well for people buying Dai if they do need to buy Dai, and we also have SendWire. So there are a couple different options that we could use to basically get people into the system. And then the offloading will be something similar as, we just use SendWire to get their money back. So so that'll be great. We'll get wallets into the hands of all these new people. Another issue that's kind of a more interesting legal point is that, and this is something we've been exploring, is that I believe it's in the state of New York, if you put money into something in the hopes of winning, it's considered a lottery and it has to fall under the lottery regulations. So something we'd like to add is more of if you can imagine, kind of like a curve that distributes the funds with a focus on one person, so that one person gets the most, but there's this long tail where everyone gets something. It's kind of like a funds redistribution. Potentially that could circumvent some of the legalities that we foresee down the road. And it would also mean that we could completely customize the distribution mechanism once the lottery ends. So that's another.
Are you talking about a bonding curve? Is this a bonding curve? Or is
I didn't want to say that word, but it's along those lines, because we would need some function that basically distributes the funds based on your sort of your place in the list. So, but that's going to be interesting to implement. Probably a little more complicated because even as it stands, we had to incorporate this other library in order to do the proportional weighting based on people's tokens. So there's some complexity behind that. But anyway, that's one of the features that we have planned coming up.
Well, as a side note, write this down. We have one of the world's foremost experts on token bonding curves in the call today. So get with Florian.
Oh, fantastic.
Boom.
Right.
Synergy is happening right here.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, connections being made. This is great.
Avoid them if you don't have to use them.
So,
David, I
yeah.
have my audio. I think I'm good on just audio now, just FYI.
Okay.
All right. And just to continue, we're also interested in pursuing the philanthropic causes. We love the idea of being able to donate to different foundations, but then getting your money back, so that it's granted the foundations wouldn't be receiving a ton of funds, but they'd easily be able to capture, say, $10,000 worth of interest, or if depending on the size of the pool. And it's kind of this easy way for people to donate. So we want to be able to run different pools at the same time, some of them being philanthropic, some of them even, there have actually been requests by people for them to be able to deposit a lot of money without being in the lottery as such, so that it can help boost the return, and then and have that go to the winner, but then be able to withdraw their funds. So just sort of to help kind of encourage deposits and encourage people to save. So there's a lot of different directions we can go. I think going in the direction of improving this as a primitive is really interesting, because especially as we open source it, more projects can use it, and it can become this financial primitive as a sort of pool with an interest-bearing mechanism like Compound. But there's also the onboarding side. So there's kind of two major directions, I think, that we'd like to push in. And so yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Did I miss anything, Leighton? Have I covered our bases?
No, I think that's pretty good. Yeah,
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
About one functionality that I would personally love to see on your platform, guys. So I've been thinking a lot about how it would be really cool to refund user transaction fees in like an application like this. Do you guys see that as something that would be possible in the platform in the future?
That's interesting. I think that would relate to the whole bonding curves thing, in that if we can at least essentially structure it so people receive their gas fees back, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm referring to.
Yeah, definitely that would be fun to add, because I'm sure we could easily cover that. The gas fees are just like 10-20 cents right now.
Exactly, and that could really boost participation if it's really like zero gas fee. It's like a true no loss lottery.
There's some interesting ways to identify that, so you can attempt to do some kind of meta transaction at the beginning, and fund it from a pool previously or the existing pool, or you can attempt to refund later. But the meta transaction thing raises some issues, though. Have you guys considered layer 2 for this thing?
No, not at the moment. I feel like our traffic hasn't been that big, so it hasn't been a real issue. But that is an interesting question as to how we might incorporate that. The thing is, there is only one transaction to get in, so maybe if there's enough of a network effect on some like layer 2 payment solution, like a sort of a payment channel or payment hub, then we can then link to that to allow people to kind of make a shortcut into the contract. But right now, it's very simple. It's very simple. It's just 2 transactions basically. So we haven't really considered that.
Yeah. So there was a question in the chat from Mateo Rabinowitz. Mateo, I'm sure you have a mic. If you want, you could hop on and just ask your question. Or I can read it out. So how will you address legal points raised in Freakonomics lottery? Like, so Freakonomics.com did a couple of talks on like no loss lotteries, and the TLDR for the legal point is that states don't like competition, so they made no loss lotteries illegal. So how do you guys what's your philosophy on dealing with the legal points of history?
I can speak to that a little bit. This is Leighton, even though I'm not on video. So speaking from a U.S. context, no loss lotteries actually can be legal, are legal if they're affiliated with certain types of banks. So that's a recent law change. I think it was after 2008 they made that change. So there is that. But the other thing is U.S. legal context, and this is what Brendan was talking about, is one of the definitions of a lottery is that 2 or more, but not all participants, receive more than they put in. So the loophole, kind of the legal hack, is that if we distribute the interest so that like everyone gets 2% and then one person gets the rest, that then makes it not a lottery. So that's how we're planning to address that.
Nice, that's really interesting. All right.
I can link you guys to that federal statute when I am off the call.
Right on. Have you explored launching in jurisdictions other than the U.S.? Matthew, so get a good legal opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we need a legal opinion. Yes, I totally agree with you, Matthew. And then launching in other jurisdictions, I mean, in my mind, we have, you know, we're on Ethereum, we're using Dai, we've launched in every jurisdiction. So it's really just a matter of how do we protect the users and how do we make sure we can continue to operate. But in my mind, we have launched in every jurisdiction.
Right on. So let me see. Currently, you guys, I saw this other question in the chat. Currently, you guys charge 10% of the total interest accrued. You guys take a cut as the administrator. Do you see this as a long-term revenue strategy for yourselves, or do you see any evolution there?
I think we see the evolution. We wanted to put it in there just because we figured start with something that like has some viability and sustainability to it, and then you can take it away. But where we see that going is being able to take that 10% and potentially distribute it to different actors in the ecosystem. So maybe someone wants to stand up a contextualized landing page for people in South Africa. And maybe they get the 5% of that, or maybe they get half of that 10%. So 5% of all the interest of people who come through that. So what are ways, or we've also been talking about tokenizing ownership of that 10%. So you could buy a token, which then entitles you to interest that's coming from those pools. So definitely see it as an important part of the future, but don't see it just kind of accruing to us into perpetuity, but see it more as like a tool, a variable we can play with to figure out how do we grow this to be as big as possible.
I like that a lot. That sounds like super healthy. I like that a lot.
Just want to jump in and add a quick comment here as well. This is something we were looking at briefly in the last sprint, is tokenizing the tickets themselves. And some people have raised this on Twitter, and it is something that that I thought about, because then they'd be able to basically use them potentially as collateral themselves. Perhaps they'd be worth slightly more because there's a chance of winning more money, but regardless, they could even just be considered parity. So at least people can then start to trade these items. The second thing is people should be able to withdraw before the lock period as well. That's something that was discussed, so we are looking at as well. So just want to clarify a few of those points if anyone's wondering.
Nice. So I know that earlier in the call you guys talked about this this whole no loss lottery as just being a primitive, a tool, and I missed the question in the chat that asked whether this idea of a no loss lottery can be applied to something like insurance, for example. So like it'd be great not to throw money away every year to all the yeah, that's just the tail end of the question. Yeah. So what other ways do you, I'm trying to think of a good way to ask this question. But if the person who asked the question is still in the call, feel free to hop on the mic. But do you guys see something like this being applied to other industries, maybe abstracted away for the user? Like, then why wouldn't they just use Compound? I'm thinking. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, I think the most obvious additional use case for us, or new use case, is like the philanthropic one, where the lottery has a predetermined winner. I'm not sure about how the economics of the health one would work, but maybe it would. And there's a lot of green space thinking to do.
There's been some interesting discussions. Like the commons part is obviously, I've tweeted about this too, is the thing that, or the humanitarian aspect is the thing that makes me most excited about this too. But there's already been some discussions I've seen about people having polls about where they should be donating the proceeds if they happen to win, which is really interesting to see this sort of emergent behavior. And,
yeah,
and one of the
cool
things was that the choices were open source or crypto projects that are, sort of chronically underfunded themselves. And so there's some interesting alignments here beyond just, disaster relief, but also how do we incentivize the crypto commons or the open source commons? How do we get developers paid in a way that is frictionless? Because through bitter experience, I've learned that it's very difficult to get people to donate their crypto in this space, sadly enough. So if we can reduce that overhead or the sting of actually funding some of these critical pieces of infrastructure, this might be an interesting alignment for you guys.
Yeah, for sure. I also saw the question there. I just want to answer the one about Compound. We don't have a direct relationship with Compound Finance. We just are using them. We would be open to using other platforms, but Compound Finance made the most sense with all their functionalities and features right now, but open to suggestions.
Andrew, do you have access to a microphone, or do you want us to read that out for you? I can pick it up then.
All right, go for it,
Andrew asks, do you think there would be enough borrowing demand at scale to accrue sufficient interest, or how do you imagine evolving this thing at scale? So what happens when you get big, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. I think we imagine evolving kind of at the same speed as the greater ecosystem, right? So like, Maker has the 100 million cap right now on Dai. So obviously we would hope that there'd be more than $100 million in a pool in the 5-year future. And so
you guys are thinking big. I like it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about the fact that $80 billion is spent every year in the United States on lottery tickets, if we have $100 million locked, that's way less than 1% of the market. That's tiny. Like, we're not even actually doing that well. So, so we should be having like $1 billion. So, anyways, so I think though, but obviously that's not possible today. But the way we see it scaling is proportional to the other primary pieces of infrastructure that are out there. So the Ethereum network itself, the MakerDAO network, or not network, but currency, and obviously, I think that is the right speed because those last mile infrastructure layers to get people into Dai really easily aren't really there right now. So I think it will kind of all proportionally scale over the next 5 years. That's kind of how we think about scaling.
I gotcha. So really quick, we have about 20 minutes left in the call, and I'm gonna just ask these kind of last questions that haven't been answered yet, and then we're gonna move on to just what's been going on in Maker this week. Gonna wrap it up. So Andrew Kenston asks, why is the minimum 20 Dai instead of 1 Dai?
We want to experiment with the minimum, figure out what works best. We started with 20 just because we thought we wanted people to put in a little bit more. So we thought smaller user base, people put in more, but it's definitely a variable that's kind of just up for experimentation. So it's somewhat arbitrary, the 20 number.
Got it. And does the smart contract automatically lend this out? I think he's asking if the smart contract lends it out before the lock period.
So no, not before the lock period.
Okay.
Once it's locked, the smart contract though does it. Is the one that actually lends the funds.
Huh? Why is that? It doesn't seem like there should be a barrier there.
Brendan, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it was simple to code. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's very easy to start thinking of all these new features that we can add to it, but we built this in 2 sprints, and we wanted to make the code as simple as possible. So while you could progressively deposit into the money market, it does make the contract more complicated. And if we did want to give the people the ability to withdraw, then that further complicates things. So we just kept things simple for the time being, and we have so many different ideas that we want to build for the next iteration. So I do think that that's a strong point, though, especially if the open period, if we play with that and it ends up being weeks rather than a couple of days, that means you could accrue significant interest on that money that's locked up for the time being. So right now the open period is 3 days, which is pretty minimal in terms of interest, but it is something that I think that idea has merit, and I think it'd be worth exploring for the next sprint. So if that answers your question.
Right on. Yeah, I think that answers the question generally. And the last question: will you get? Is the launch of each new pool the same as the launch of a new smart contract?
Yes. So each pool is its own smart contract. That we have this pool manager contract that ensures there's only one at a time, because we want to encourage network effects for people to bring their friends in on the singular pool to make the interest as high as possible. So it's kind of worth and interesting to get involved in. And this pool manager contract is essentially a factory, and each pool that gets created deploys a new pool contract. So that pool is managing its own funds in the compound finance contract. So
Got
yeah,
it. And so just as sort of the follow-up, the reason for that question, if so, like users will need some sort of confidence that the code hasn't been changed from pool to pool. Is there like some sort of like verification that happens to ensure that like each new pool smart contract is kind of has the integrity?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because it actually made programming it kind of a pain, because when we did deploy a new pool and we wanted to change something, we couldn't. You have to deploy a new pool manager contract because it's the factory that creates these new pools. So I guess the answer to that is that we have now open sourced the code. We're going to be working on verifying it on Etherscan. So once the pool manager contract is verified, that will effectively, by proxy, give you verification of the pools themselves as well, because you'll be able to look at the contract code for the whole thing. So yeah, but that being said, we do have, it is upgradable, that pool manager contract. And so technically I could go in there and upgrade it to give myself some additional privileges for subsequent pools. So it'll be, I guess, full disclosure, we're going to verify it, but potentially I could change it. So I guess for the time being, you'll just have to trust me that I won't go in there and mess around with things. But it always will be up there on Etherscan for people to verify. We're going to make the source code is already available, so it should all be in the public domain and verifiable.
Nice, good stuff, guys. Well, thank you, Brendan, and thank you, Leighton, so much for coming on the call. I appreciate it personally, and I'm sure the overall community really greatly appreciates it, especially the open sourcing thing. I'm really happy you guys open source the code. I think that takes off a lot of angst from crypto Twitter.
Yeah. Well, just to jump in and address one of the questions. I mean, Chris brought up a good point. Is just scrolling up a little bit. He talks about these future plans sound awesome, but first you'll need to figure out how to retain your user base as dozens of clones with lower fees, more features, and possibly better marketing launch in the next couple of weeks. That is one of the reasons that we wanted to only have one pool out there, so that we would actually get sufficient traction so that people would buy tickets, because it was high enough. If you have a proliferation of different pools, then each one will have less, and there'll be less incentive to get involved. So that's one of the reasons why we elected to sort of withhold the source for the time being. That being said, it doesn't really make sense to not contribute this back to the community when the code has been written and it's been audited, and we're just going to keep pushing hard on making this the best one. So that's kind of our special sauce at the moment, is that we're the first at bat, and so we're going to try our hardest to really improve it.
Right on. Well, you heard it here, guys. Buy your tickets. PoolTogether is a thing. It's live and it works and it's beautiful. So thank you guys for coming on the call again.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
To continue with the call, in the last 15 minutes, we're going to go over what we usually go over. We typically do events at the start, but I'm going to leave events for last because there's not too much going on. And I want to cover the stuff that's been going on in governance, some of our partnerships and integrations, some stuff that came out on our Maker blog, and then some highlights from the community first. And then if we have time, I'll cover some of the events as well. And if you guys would like to see what's going on instead of just hearing it, I'm posting the agenda in the call so you guys can follow along. Everything's linked there. So yeah. And so to kick it off, governance. So on Friday the 21st, there was an executive vote to raise the stability fee by 1% to a new stability fee of 17.5%. So that didn't pass so far. There was not enough voter turnout to beat out the old proposal. And so on Monday, a governance poll came out. So yesterday, a governance poll came out, and it was again to determine the next executive vote that's going to happen again on Friday, this coming Friday. And so, if you guys don't know, the governance poll is live for 3 days. It's going to deactivate Thursday morning, I believe, around noon Eastern Standard Time. And yeah, the options range from 12.5% to a 20.5% stability fee. So if you're an MKR voter, go and vote. But keep in mind that there's a lot for you to consider. The governance calls that we host every Thursday have been plugging away consistently, and there's a lot of analysis going on around the peg, and it seems like the peg is healthy. But don't take it from me. There's a ton of resources. There's a summary and discussion thread of the call on the r/MakerGov subreddit, and there's also Matthew Runowitz's almost weekly narrative on MakerDAO. He published one on the 17th, a little over a week ago, but it's still definitely relevant. And there's a lot of other tail discussions around governance going on that are really interesting, like the discussion that Matthew has been bringing up about DSR and stability rate calculations and how they are calculated MCD like pragmatically, and it digs deep into that problem. There's a thread in MakerGov that digs deep into that problem, is what I meant to say. So yeah, that's about it for governance. If you're interested more in governance, there's a Thursday call that you are welcome to join and participate in. It's a really, really educating call, I'll tell you that. But regardless of governance, let's move into partnerships and integrations. And by the way, if anybody has anything to ask me or stop, feel free to ask. I don't mind being interrupted. So some partnerships and integrations. As we've just heard, PoolTogether integrated Dai, and they're tricking people into saving money, which is really cool. The MakerDAO CDP portal is the first DeFi app to be integrated into my Ether wallet this week. If you didn't hear about that. And then lastly, I know I mentioned it last call, but a bit more official information came out about the Oxfam trials of delivery of disaster relief using Dai. And so in the pilot, Oxfam used used 200 residents in the villages of Pango and Melimat on the island of Ifate. I think that's how you pronounce it. And they were given like tap to pay cards, and each were loaded with about $50 in Dai. And those cards were able to be used as payments across a network of around 32 vendors that consisted of stores and schools. And the vendors, in turn, were provided with Android smartphones and an app allowing them to accept the payments and the ability to convert the Dai to US dollars on a 1-for-1 ratio. And yeah, that was their pilot. They used 200 residents, and it seems that the pilot went successfully and is going successfully. So really wanted to kind of talk a bit more about that, because last week there wasn't too much information about the specifics of what they were doing with Dai. And God knows I love specifics. And I bet you guys do too. So, all right. So that's about it for partnerships and integrations. For podcasts and interviews, Mariana Conti was actually on the POV Crypto podcast that is hosted. One of the hosts is our very own community's David Hoffman. And so Mariano talked about the frontier of Dai and the future, and like how Dai is being used for himself personally, and etc. So feel free to check that out if you guys have a commute or some time that you like to listen to podcasts. From the Maker blog this week, we had a couple of things. We had a Dai versus Libra infographic that our team put out, just to kind of like put them side by side and compare them as tokens. There was a blog post called "All Event Roads Lead to Dai Adoption," and it talked about our pursuit of Dai adoption and the things that we've been doing so far, the events we've participated in, the events we are planning to participate in, the type of people we're trying to get around, and just some of our future plans around events. And then lastly, a couple of weeks ago, we had the design team put out a survey for the community to answer about rebranding Maker. And so over 45 people answered the rebranding survey, and just on behalf of our team, thank you. We appreciate that a lot, and any input like that is always super helpful. So thank you to the community. Yeah, so that's about it for all the official stuff. Now we have some highlights from the community. We saw Chris Hopcroft from Argon. He came into our chat this week, and he was scoping out a project to integrate Argon with Maker, as well as Uniswap, Compound, and ENS. And he posted a GitHub issue in Argon that outlines the proposal, and yeah, so it's interesting, and you guys should look into it, because I did not have too much time to do that myself this week, but I will, because it sounded really interesting. Besides that, some developer creations, well, really just one that I had on my list. There was the fact that CDP Saver added slippage limiting, and it also integrated with ETH to Dai and Uniswap. So more abstraction. And I hear notifications, but I can't see anything popping on my screen. But that's okay. All right, so articles. There was only one real article that came out this week that was the community produced. It was how to reduce your liquidation price on MakerDAO by 40%, which, it's just a interesting way of saying this is how you leverage, this is how you leverage Ether. If you want to reduce your liquidation price, just lock up your Ether that you purchase with the Dai you initially borrowed, and so on and so forth. But he did a great job in pointing out that this is not riskless and that you should be very careful. And so, like, I give the author props for the way he framed it. I personally liked it. There was also a really interesting thread, just one that I wanted to point out this week from our Reddit. It was a question. It was an expat from US who lives in Zambia, and he's talking about how the kwacha is losing, which is his local currency, is losing about 30% of its value since January. And also the fact that other surrounding countries' local currencies are also losing value in Africa. And whether or not it's possible to take his entire paycheck and purchase Dai, and then obtain Dai to USD, and basically how he would go about doing remittances from where he is. And it was a really interesting thread because a lot of people commented, and it was just a real reminder of kind of the solutions that we're trying to solve, and the solutions we're trying to solve, and what's really going to be possible in the near future, and even now. But right now, it's just hard to figure it out sometimes. And yeah, Akiva, you could check out the link to the Argon thing right here. I'm gonna just link it directly, so you guys can all check it out there. And lastly, I saw Block Geeks Training did an intro to MakerDAO. That was a cool video. And so yeah, that was about it. And I'm really glad I flew through those things super quick, because we have about 5 minutes left on the call. So I'm gonna leave it open for questions for like a minute. And if you guys don't have questions, I can really quickly go through some of the real life events that are going on this week. All right. So some of the real life events that are going on this week. Oh, question. Yes. All right, Florian. What is the thinking behind the rebranding survey? So that's a really great question. I think the thinking, as I remember it, is that as we transition to multi-collateral Dai, we're going to be overall addressing a way larger market, and and we want to, kind of rethink and just kind of assess our current branding and our current image, and see what our current user base thinks about it and thinks what could be changed, and just to gather kind of feedback from the community about our current sort of image. Yeah. Are we thinking of renaming MakerDAO or Dai? Maybe, but no, most likely not, because they've already gathered like a lot of network effect, right, and a lot of branding power. But nothing is out of reach. But again, I'm kind of shooting from the hip with my answers, Florian. These are really answers for the guys in the marketing and design and product teams who are doing this stuff. But I could probably get one of them on the call in the future. But yeah, so Andrew Quenston asks, any update on when savings Dai accounts are coming to balance the interest charging aspect? Yeah, so the Dai savings rate is planned to be launched with multi-collateral Dai, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and so there's no current update on a timeline for that. Yeah. All right, so 3 minutes. I will run through the 4 events that are going on this week. So on the 25th, it's an online event that anybody can join. Oh, it's actually today. Oh, it actually just ended. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Never mind. Not that one. Not going to mention that one. So on the 26th, tomorrow in Singapore, our community manager Jocelyn is going to be at InnoFest Unbound, which is like a technology innovation conference in Singapore. We're going to be representing there. Then on the 29th in South Korea, we have an AMA. Do is going to be doing the AMA with BlockEye. And then in Mexico City, we have Mariano attending the Blockchain Summit in Latin America. And that's about it for this week. And so with the last 2 minutes of the call, I want to just say thank you everybody for joining. This was a super interesting call for me. Again, just thanking Brandon and Leighton for joining as well. Thank you guys. This was a great call. And look forward to seeing whoever shows up next week. And I'm always happy to host these calls and facilitate them. And I'm always open to feedback on these calls. If you want to see something different, if you have an idea for a format, ping me, message me. I want to hear it. Let's make this call funner. So yeah, thank you everybody for coming. And you could see the recording in probably an hour or two if you'd like. So take care, everybody.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.